A note to listeners, American Hustlers was created from in-depth research and reporting, public records, and the opinions of participants. The views expressed do not reflect those of Frequency Machine, its affiliates, licensees, or employees. In some cases, names were changed to protect the privacy of those involved, and all subjects are presumed innocent until proven guilty. This episode also includes some violent and sexually explicit content that may be triggering to some. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Previously on American Hustlers.
Our clock was ticking because we knew that Kaushal was going to go to court, and we had to intercept Kaushal first.
Palm Springs detectives had arrested Miguel Bustamante, Kaushal Narula, David Replogle, and Danny Garcia in connection with the presumed murder of Palm Springs resident Cliff Lambert. 4 months later, during questioning, Miguel Bustamante brought up the name of another individual, Ricky. Police deduced the person's real name was Craig McCarthy. They find his place of work in San Francisco, drive north, and meet up with him.
We interviewed him, and basically Craig said, yeah, we killed him.
Whoa.
Craig's guilt was palpable. He agreed to head to Palm Springs with detectives and take them to the area where Cliff Lambert's body was buried. But with this story, nothing's that easy.
Craig can't remember.
Craig McCarthy eventually took a plea deal on a lesser charge of manslaughter. He agreed to testify against Kaushal, Danny, David, and Miguel. His testimony, along with a treasure trove of other evidence, worked. In 2011, David and Miguel were convicted of first-degree murder and were sentenced to life without parole. Next up were Kaushal and Danny, who had the same mountain of evidence stacked against them.
The most important text messages that were recovered were Bustamante and Kaushal Narula were communicating right before the murder, where they're texting back and forth saying, hey, do it now, kill him now.
Kaushal and Danny took a rather unorthodox approach to their trial.
They decided to defend themselves and were both demanding a laptop.
The court issued Kaushal and Danny Mac laptops so they could prepare their case. But during a pretrial hearing,
the judge had received info that Danny had been recording all the different court proceedings on that court-issued laptop.
The judge temporarily seized Danny and Kaushal's laptops, had the recordings deleted, the microphones removed, and the court transcripts sealed. But these recordings were about to rear their ugly head.
Well, from the very beginning of writing this book, I would have dreams all the time about Cliff.
That's Dawn Martinez. She, along with her sisters Sherry and Kim, and, of course, victim-turned-armchair detective Tyson Wrensch, spent a year and a half literally writing the book on Kaushal Narula, Danny Garcia, and the trail of mayhem they left in their wake. A trail that ultimately ended with Cliff Lambert's murder.
It's just like, where are you, Cliff? And, trying to ask him questions like, give us hints on where your body is. We want to help find you, to bring closure and everything. And I'm looking in the desert in my mind trying to find where, a spot is that's disturbed earth or something. I don't know, even know how to describe it. It was weird.
Weird is an understatement. In our wildest dreams, Julie and I never imagined we'd have anything in common with the Palm Springs police, or with Dawn and her sisters for that matter. But alas, here we all are, plagued with the same unanswered question. If Kaushal, Danny, and their accomplices had murdered Cliff Lambert, where in the hell was his body?
One of these days, I'm hoping Kaushal's going to tell us where Cliff really is.
So you think Kaushal knows where he is?
Oh, I'm positive. He has got to know where he is. I really think so.
One thing is for sure. Even if Kaushal did know where Cliff's body was, he had nothing to gain and everything to lose by coughing up details ahead of his trial. Part of his defense hinged upon the fact that the state couldn't say with 100% certainty that Cliff Lambert was even dead. And no one felt the pressure more to downplay that detail than the two people who sat at the prosecution table, Deputy DA Lisa DeMaria and Detective Simon Min, whose fears literally bled into his subconscious.
And there's times where I've had nightmares where I'm in trial and Cliff would walk in and say, you guys are wasting taxpayers' money. I'm right here. All you have to do is call me.
For over 3 years, Detective Min and other investigators at the Palm Springs Police Department turned over every stone trying to locate Cliff's body, but to no avail.
We scoured the area, we used cadaver dogs. Cliff is nowhere to be found.
All rise.
Danny and Kaushal's trial began on June 25, 2012 at the Larson Justice Center in Indio, California. And as Deputy District Attorney Lisa DeMaria began her opening statements, it wasn't just the lack of a body that was hanging over her head. So was the fact that of the two, only Kaushal was present the night Cliff was killed. But if she had any doubts about her case as she addressed the packed courtroom, DeMaria, it didn't show it. Here's Karen Devine, news anchor for KESQ.
Lisa DeMaria, she totally described as tough and smart and well-read and a hard worker and a bulldog in the courtroom. And in interviews with our TV station, she never held back, which I loved about her because, sometimes you get these generic reactions from attorneys.
Yeah.
But she definitely didn't mind saying how much she thought Kaushal and Danny were being manipulative and were career criminals and that all these guys needed to go down.
Tyson also had a good sense of what the case meant to her.
Lisa DeMaria knew that Cliff Lambert had no family, and she took it upon herself to be the one that would get justice for him. And I know for her it was all-consuming, and getting a conviction on a no-body homicide is really, really difficult. And this was 16 hours a day for 3.5 years for her to prosecute this.
DA DeMaria walked the jury through all the evidence she did have, and there was plenty. Incriminating text messages, a dubious paper trail, not to mention Craig McCarthy's confession. On cross-examination, Kaushal and Danny, who were representing themselves, did their best to undermine the state's case. But according to Detective Min, who sat there every day,
It was a show. They didn't know what they're doing. They didn't know what they're asking. And it was just, these questions were ridiculous.
others in the courtroom reported Kaushal and Danny would ramble and get off topic. Objections flew from DeMaria's side as frustration mounted for Danny and Kaushal. Their emotions sometimes got the best of them, leading to screaming and, get this, crying in the courtroom. Judge David Downing attempted to keep the proceedings on track, but he had his work cut out for him. In early September of 2012, when the trial was starting to wind down, Tyson Wrensch was in the courtroom to hear every word.
So I went for closing arguments, and that was a fireworks show.
It was hard to imagine what Kaushal or Danny could possibly do to get the jury's sympathy. But that didn't stop Kaushal from trying, especially during his closing arguments.
So Kaushal dropped the bomb that he's been in love with Danny Garcia since day one, and he just couldn't get over the fact that Danny didn't love him back. And I just remember my jaw dropping, going, oh my God, am I hearing all this? It was just absolute and total, complete insanity.
What was the reaction like in the courtroom?
Full-blown gasps. And I just remember Danny's mom sitting in the back with her New Age rosary bead thing that she just kept flipping her beads. Yeah, the whole thing was just weird.
Given that Danny and Kaushal were staring at a possible life sentence without parole, I can't begin to understand why they'd represent themselves. But they did. Throughout the pretrial hearings and now the trial itself, there was zero shortage of drama, as Julie pointed out in the last episode.
You know, I think they just love theatrics and want attention. And this is a great stage, the court.
If the courtroom was a stage to Danny and Kaushal, they'd put on a hell of a show. But finally, after a 3-month-long trial, both sides had rested their case, and it was in the hands of the jury. 2 days later, they came to their conclusion. Here's Dawn, one of the sisters who helped write the book along with Tyson.
Were you there for the verdict?
Yes.
Describe that for me. Kind of set the scene.
I remember Danny's parents were there, and the courtroom, it was packed that day, and they actually did have the TV cameras there, too. They were right behind me.
On September 7th, 2012, a packed courtroom sat comfortably in the air conditioning that was working hard to compensate for the 104-degree heat outside. Would this jury find Danny and Kaushal guilty, just like their co-defendants David Replogle and Miguel Bustamante?
So the jury comes back, and the judge, says to them, "Have you reached a verdict?" And the jury foreman says, "We have, Your Honor."
Kaushal was first up.
He proceeds to read each of the 10 charges one by one, and after each charge comes the word guilty. And there's just sort of this feeling that it's over. Like, oh my God, that Kaushal just sort of like inexplicably smirking at the jury, like,
Ew.
"I'll be waiting in hell for you," or so, like some creepy horror movie.
Super creepy.
Yeah, but that's Narula for you.
Judge Downing then canvassed the jury to confirm each one of their verdicts, and
then it was Danny's turn, right? We've got 10 charges coming down, and the words guilty follow all of those as well.
wow.
And although unlike Kaushal, Danny sort of bowed his head and looked like he was crying. And his parents, they were sort of shaking their heads like, no, this can't be happening.
Except that it was. Danny Garcia and Kaushal Narula had finally been brought to justice. Or so it would seem.
I feel like in the movie or TV version, it's like credits roll, guy's in jail, it's over. But why am I not surprised that's not the case with this group?
I think at every turn, they've taken a left turn that surprises everyone, so why would this be any different?
Do you remember in the movie Carrie when they go to the graveyard and the hand is out?
Yes.
That's these guys.
Yeah.
Kaushal and Danny. They're Carrie. They're unstoppable. It's crazy. It's like a multiverse, Marvel-verse, where nothing really matters because they always seem to have some other parallel universe where they pull a rabbit out of the hat. Could I put any more metaphors in there if I tried?
Wow, that was a lot. 9 movie references, 4 characters, and a magic trick.
Come on, if that doesn't say American Hustlers, I don't know what does.
True Crime News presents American Hustlers. It took nearly 4 years, but by September of 2012, the 6 men responsible for the demise of Cliff Lambert were finally held accountable. Russell Manning, who impersonated Cliff, took a plea deal and got 5 years for fraud. Craig McCarthy, one of the 2 attackers who surprised Cliff in his own kitchen, also took a plea, got his murder charges dropped down to manslaughter, and cooperated with the prosecution. He'd eventually be sentenced to 25 years and 4 months. David Replogle and Miguel Bustamante were both sentenced to life without parole. And then it was Danny and Kaushal's turn. Danny was sentenced first on October 5th, 2012.
Danny went from being in a suit and tie and dapper haircut to wearing orange and had his hair buzz cut.
In California, a first-degree murder conviction comes with an automatic sentence of life without parole. So, Judge Downing found other ways to add his touch to Danny and Kaushal's fate. In Danny's case, that meant mandating he pay Cliff's estate restitution in the form of $215,000. And he had some pointed final words. The bus is waiting outside. 2 months later, on December 14th, 2012, Judge Downing was even more direct with Kaushal. Tyson was there.
The judge, said that you've been found guilty of murder and the first degree, and I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And the courtroom erupted.
Judge Downing ordered Kaushal to pay restitution to Cliff's estate in the amount of $300,000. And when he tried to object to the amount,
Kaushal immediately sort of burst in with a voice that I hadn't heard before. It was almost like a 3-year-old who was whining. And Judge Downing leans forward into the microphone and he goes, "Mr. Narula, you took this man's car, you took this man's shoes, you took this man's pet, you took this man's house, and you took this man's life. So not only am I imposing this penalty, he leans forward into the mic even further and he goes, but I relish it.
Nearly everyone Julie and I spoke to about the story agreed that Kaushal got what he deserved. But we were surprised to learn some felt differently about Danny.
My phone rings, and I'm looking at it, and it's like, what is this number? And I answered, and it's like, oh, my gosh, this is Danny calling me. And he gave me my first interview right then.
That's Dawn again.
What did he say on that call?
Oh, my gosh, what did he say on that call? Just, he was totally surprised that he did get life and everything like that. I did not believe that he should have been convicted for life for what he did, because he was not actually physically there, and he did not know that the murder was going to take place.
Do you think he had some motivation or agenda, or what do you think?
I think he wanted his story to get out to people, that he did not partake in the murder itself. I think he wanted everyone to know that.
On this particular call, I wasn't just talking to Dawn. Her sisters, Sherry and Kim, yep, another Kim, super confusing, were also on the line. And so was Julie. There's a lot of voices to keep straight here, so I'll do my best to call out who's who as we go. Here's Sherry.
I never thought Danny had anything to do with the murder, really, but that was a sore subject with Tyson. I mean, you didn't want to talk about that because he has such a disliking for Danny that we didn't dare tell him our feelings.
This is Dawn. I mean, I totally get where Tyson's coming from, too, because, he trusted Danny. So, of course, you're going to feel hurt because the guy ripped you off, basically, that he's guilty of other things. I mean, maybe 25 years or something, but not life. That's just my opinion, anyway.
And here's Julie.
So what do you actually think he is guilty of?
He's guilty of the theft and possession of stolen property and all of that. He is guilty of that.
Here's Sherry again.
What are the laws in California? They say if you even conspire to murder, then you're just as guilty as the one that murders, right?
Sherry's right. It's different in every state, but in California, those that conspire can be prosecuted and penalized the same as those that committed the crime.
So that's the core thing, conspiring versus the actual act itself.
Here's Sherry again.
Yeah, because there were the three of them that were actually there.
The three people Sherry is referring to are Craig McCarthy, Miguel Bustamante, and, of course, Kaushal.
I don't think Danny knew that they were going to actually kill Cliff. I think that he actually believed that they were just going to kidnap him and take him to Mexico. But Danny had the chance to say, I didn't know anything about the murder. I am guilty of the other things he did. He could have said that, but he didn't. Do
you think perhaps he didn't say anything because he was feeling the guilt? I mean, what did that run through your mind at that time?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't say on that one either at the time.
After hearing the sister's perspective on Danny's guilt and punishment, I gave Tyson a call to hear what he had to say. How do you feel that the sisters, Dawn, Sherry, and Kim, felt about Danny's sentencing?
That's a good question. I haven't really brought it up, partly because I really don't want to know, but I do get the sense that perhaps they feel like Danny got the short stick.
And you agree or disagree?
I mean, Danny was the key to connecting Kaushal and to, hatching the plan. If Danny hadn't been friends with Cliff Lambert, then this would have never happened.
Right. And I think that the gray area for some people comes in with the fact that Danny and David Replogle, for that matter, weren't actually physically in Palm Springs when Cliff was murdered. Do they really deserve life without parole? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's all part of the conspiracy, right? I mean, there's the text messages. While the murder was happening, Danny gets the text from Kaushal that says, it's done, we own the world. And Danny's response was, poor Cliffy. There was no remorse there. There was no, oh my God, we need to call the cops. That's the definition of a sociopathic murderer.
For 4 long years, the Palm Springs community watched and waited as, one by one, the justice system put 6 men in prison for their part in Cliff Lambert's murder. A tragedy that left a deep scar across the community, one that many residents feared could still reopen. Here is Karen Devine again. She's the evening news anchor you've met a bunch by now. How did Cliff's death and the trials for his murder resonate in the Palm Springs community?
Well, I think that there was some fear in the community and maybe some awareness as to what can happen, that this is probably not the first group of people that are out to scam people with money, not just gay people with money in Palm Springs, but people with money. And I think it was an eye-opener, to tell you the truth. Mm-hmm. Just an eye-opener, but a lot of sadness because Cliff worked hard his whole life. Yeah. He had this beautiful property.
Yeah.
He was seemingly very friendly, and just taken out like that is really sad.
It's so sad. And I wonder, what do the perpetrators feel now? All these years after Cliff Lambert's murder, do any of them regret their part in it? Regret any of the other victims' lives they've destroyed by conning them? Or do they only regret getting caught? After interviewing people for this podcast, I can say for sure that regret is a word that comes up time and time again for the victims. They've voiced their regret of ever crossing paths with Kaushal and or Danny in the first place. How different their lives might be today if Keiko hadn't lost her family fortune. If Gary Heidenreich hadn't lost hundreds of thousands of dollars on a painting that never showed up. If Cliff hadn't lost his life by his very own kitchen knife. Regret also haunts those who've been unable to find Cliff Lambert's remains. Will they ever be recovered? Maybe a hiker finds them? Perhaps someone hunting for arrowheads who instead stumbles across a skull, a femur, a clavicle? If you recall, this whole podcast started with Tyson driving around Palm Springs looking for Cliff Lambert's body.
So right now we are off of the 10 freeway. Exit 114 is the Whitewater exit.
He even called a psychic.
She says, as I'm getting a male who's says his legs hurt. And, we're like, oh my God.
And Tyson isn't alone in the quest. Dawn also desperately wants to find Cliff's remains.
I mean, Cliff, of course. It's just like, give us hints on where your body is. We want to help find you, to bring closure and everything.
Then there's Detective Min, a man whose job it was to solve Cliff's murder and find his body. He arrested the 6 men responsible and helped build a case where justice was served, yet he still has regret.
Till this day, we've never found the body.
How does that feel?
For me, it was just an incomplete feeling. Like you didn't do a good enough job. And there's still time now where I'll think about it and I'll go to the San Bernardino County website, coroner's office, and try to see if any bones or if any unidentified bodies have ever been found.
Yeah. Well, that all makes sense. I mean, like you said, you had all the pieces. Everyone is doing time. And then it's still, but where's Cliff?
Exactly.
Many people involved in this case want what you want, to bring him home, because wherever he is, he's not home.
I did approach Bustamante after the verdict, and I told him, when your appeal runs out, get a hold of me and tell me where the body's at. Why would you deny anybody the ability to have a proper burial? Doesn't that weigh heavily on you? And she said, okay, I'll think about it. He never got a hold of me yet.
12 years have gone by, huh?
12 years gone by.
Last but certainly not least, here's Tyson. In what way has Cliff's murder impacted you personally, and how do you deal with that?
Cliff's murder happened almost 2 years after Danny had done me dirty. And I never thought that this would ever lead to a murder. I mean, I genuinely thought that Danny was just a con man. I mean, it was a struggle, and I feel like I did what I could, but there's that, what did I miss? What did I not do that could have put Danny, even if it put him in jail for a couple of years, would have stopped him from meeting Cliff, and none of this would happen. So that what if is always lingering, and I think it will probably haunt me, to my last day.
On April 23rd, 2013, 4 months after Kaushal's sentencing, Tyson went to an annual event in Palm Springs. His intent? to honor Cliff Lambert, a man he never met.
Riverside County holds a candlelight vigil for all of its past murder victims, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people, and it was very sobering just to see a giant park filled with posters of murder victims and the hurt that's behind each one. And this was sort of the funeral that I thought that Cliff never got.
And what made you go?
I think for closure. You know, you sit on the grass at a certain time, and they just start reading names. So when they read Clifford Lambert's name, I raised my candle, which had a cup around it, so it was sort of like a final toast.
And how did that feel for you?
You know, it's weird because, again, I never really knew him, but you can't help but feel like you know him. And especially as I've gotten to know, just the people that were impacted and all of the other victims of these guys. This is really sort of the final chapter in that saga.
The thing is, it wasn't. Find out why after the break. Kaushal and Danny, Danny Garcia, Miguel Bustamante, and David Replogle were serving life sentences for the murder of Cliff Lambert, even though his body was never found. Craig McCarthy was given 25-plus years for voluntary manslaughter. But perhaps you picked up on Julie's earlier comment.
In a movie or TV version, it's like, guy's in jail, it's over. But why am I not surprised that's not the case?
Julie's not surprised, I'm not surprised, and at this point, you're probably not surprised that 6 bad actors in prison doesn't wrap this story up in a bow. Not even close. And you may be thinking it's because Cliff's body's still out there, waiting to be unearthed. But that's not why.
What had happened was our Apple laptops that the court had purchased were, there was a default for voice activation, which recorded everything anytime the laptop was booted up.
That's Danny.
I came to find out that there was like hundreds and hundreds of audio recordings on my laptop.
Okay, remember Danny's illegal laptop court recording drama from the last episode? I mentioned we get into them when they mattered. Well, they matter. But first, a real quick recap. Since Danny and Kaushal were representing themselves, they were granted laptops to prepare for their trial. During pretrial hearings, Danny's laptop was recording everything going on in the courtroom.
So I shared that information with Narula's investigator and basically told the judge that I had recorded all of these different court proceedings and things, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not what had occurred.
Once Judge Downing got wind of the situation, he confiscated Danny and Kaushal's laptops, ordered the audio files to be dumped onto CDs, and sealed them with the court transcripts. He then had the recording devices removed and returned the computers. This whole crazy ordeal made the nightly news, and that was pretty much it. And even though it was his computer, Danny insisted he did no wrong.
It was a factory default with the program that came with the Mac.
I suppose it actually could have been, but as adamant as Danny was about getting a laptop, and as scheming and manipulative as both he and Kaushal were, I have a hard time believing this was all due to a rogue factory setting. I mean, remember, this is the same boy genius that was hacking into the email accounts of U.S. Navy admirals when he was a teenager. And personally, I've purchased more Mac laptops than I care to remember, and I've never heard of this feature. Here's Danny with more.
So the judge flipped out and was very paranoid about it. Well, we came to learn that the recordings some of them were during recesses, when it was off the record.
During recesses, meaning court recesses, when typically the only people in the courtroom would be court staff and sometimes Judge Downing. But because Danny's computer was still in the courtroom, it was recording anything said then, too. And it was during a recess where the recordings evolved from illegal on Danny's part to scandalous on Judge Downing's part. Here's Karen Devine again. Did you guys report on the controversy regarding Judge Downing?
We absolutely did. When we heard about what Judge Downing said, it was a shocker. You know how the places you hear a gasp in a courtroom? There was a gasp in the newsroom. Like, what? What did he say?
According to Danny, when he heard Judge Downing's comments, he was floored. This is part of the recording, and despite it initially being sealed, it eventually found its way to the press. First, a female voice in the courtroom says,
He likes licking envelopes.
Judge Downing says,
Oh, gross. He's HIV positive.
Female voice.
He is HIV positive.
Judge says,
Yeah. God knows where his tongue has been. Never mind. Oh.
And then Judge Downing says,
Sorry. It's a cruel world, folks.
For the judge, he was making fun of Narula's HIV status, saying it's a cruel world, but ew, yuck, he's got HIV, and he licks the envelopes that the court pleadings come in, and I don't even want to touch them. Calling us a couple of assholes, saying that it's his intention to deny every motion I file, and that's exactly what he's done throughout this trial. No matter how many motions I've filed, he consistently says, yeah, I agree with you, however, I'm going to rule against you anyways. So clearly establishing bias.
Danny was more than concerned about the potential bias, so he confronted Judge Downing in his chambers.
When I challenged him on it and said, you said some pretty inappropriate comments, Your Honor, that he said, what, I don't have a First Amendment right to freedom of speech? I can't say what I want? And I said, well, my concern is whether or not you're biased against myself or Mr. Narula. And he goes, well, why don't you just worry about yourself and don't worry about Mr. Narula? Very, very troubling. And my opinion is if those were ever to see the light of day, I imagine I'd create a shitstorm for him and probably force him off the bench.
Forcing Judge Downing off the bench, however, was secondary. What they really wanted was to appeal their convictions. And for that, they had a plan.
We want to ask the Court of Appeals to order that the judge turn over those CDs and the sealed transcripts to them for review.
And that is exactly what they did. Although not so much they, more like he, Kaushal Narula. In 2015, 3 years after his first-degree murder conviction, Kaushal filed a writ of habeas corpus, which is fancy legalese for an appeal. The appeal specifically cited that the judge had shown unacceptable bias by mocking Kaushal Narula's disease. So, I'm a television producer, writs and appeals way outside my wheelhouse. So to try and wrap my head around it all, I reached back out to the former prosecuting attorney in Orange County, Susan Kang. You might remember her from Keiko's episode. In her 25-year career, she's encountered plenty of con men. One infamous guy that went through her office in the OC was none other than the Dirty John. Here's Susan, who began by speaking to Danny's blatant disregard for the rules of the courtroom.
There's strict court rules that prohibit one from recording in the courtroom. That's actually in violation of the law, and you could be, charged with a crime. But, hey, if you're facing life without the possibility of parole, what the heck? They had nothing to lose, and they had everything to gain by figuring out what was happening in the courtroom while they were not there.
And in your opinion, is that the act of a great con man? Is that dumb luck?
Obviously, we don't know at this point if it was just dumb luck or that really Garcia and Narula were hoping that somebody said something that they could get a mistrial or what have you. Now, later on, Judge Downing, he claims that the First Amendment allows him to say what he wants.
But that's not true.
That's not correct. A judge has a duty to be impartial. Judge must read every motion. Judge must give defendant a fair trial and really have no prejudice against anyone. Narula was saying that the judge was biased against him because Narula is gay.
In your opinion, was Narula correct?
I guess at the end of the day, if I were asked whether this is fair or not, you got to err on the side of fairness. You got to err on the side of if this judge hadn't shown that kind of bias, would he rule the same way?
The appellate court had Kaushal's case for 4 years, but had not rendered a decision, just silence. Then, in April of 2016, they did what everyone involved in this case dreaded.
The Court of Appeal sent the case back to the trial court.
Meaning, they sided with Kaushal. A successful appeal doesn't automatically mean a defendant gets a new trial. The appellate court actually doesn't make those kind of decisions. All they said is, yes, Kaushal's claims seem to have merit. So the case was sent back to the DA's office, who tried it in 2012. So right now we're kind of in limbo, right? We don't know if there's going to be another trial.
So what happened in this case is that the DA's office have to decide whether to give Narula a new trial or not. And the other defendants actually have piggybacked so that they're saying, yeah, they didn't get a fair trial.
Danny Garcia, David Replogle, and Miguel Bustamante, the three perps who also got life without parole, basically raised their hands and said, the judge was biased against me too. So, fast forward 4 years to January of 2020 when Julie and I started this project. At that point, we had researched the case 6 ways to Sunday, and it was like the decision as to whether everyone would get a new trial just evaporated. We had no clue what the status was, and had all but given up on trying to find out. Then, it was June 23rd of 2020, a 96-degree SoCal working in my dining room because there's a pandemic kind of day, and for some reason, I did something I'd never done. Hi.
Hi.
So, for no apparent reason, I started to dig around on the Palm Springs court site just to see, I don't know, courts were opening and was anything going to happen with the habeas case, and found that there was a hearing scheduled.
A hearing?
The hearing was in 2 days.
Wait, a hearing about what?
So let me read you what it says. Docket. 8:30 a.m. in department number 64 for Kaushal, David, Danny, and Miguel.
What?
So I called the courts, which I was on hold forever. And I said, first of all, are you even letting people in the courthouse? And second of all, if you are, is this particular hearing open to the public? Because if so, I was going to drive down there. But long story short, the courts aren't open.
Well, do we know what this means?
Nope. Julie and I were clueless as to what the hearing was about. Did it have something to do with the 4 years of silence from the DA's office regarding potential retrials? Or was it something else? I forwarded the docket info to Karen Devine to see if she knew what was up. She didn't. Then, the day of the mysterious hearing arrived, and due to the courts not being open to the public, there was nothing to do but sit and wait. Earlier that morning, though, we did have some encouraging news. I'd actually gotten prison mail from Craig McCarthy. I called Julie.
Hello.
Hi. You still sound like you're underwater. As per usual, we were sorting out some tech issues, mostly on Julie's end.
Hey, it's not... Okay. Actually, that's pretty accurate.
So while she was sorting things out...
Hello?
Oh.
Are you there?
I was killing time by checking my email.
What?
Oh, holy shit.
What?
I just got an email from Karen Devine. Oh my god, Oh my god. The subject line on Karen's email read, "Have you seen this?" We most certainly had not. And the further I read, it was crystal clear. I did not want to.
Would you stop saying, oh my God, and tell me what it is?
Oh my god, the DA's office? They made a decision! Next time on American Hustlers. American Hustlers is a production of Frequency Machine, produced in association with True Crime News. This episode was written and hosted by me, Kim Kantner, and produced by me, Julie Golden, and Avi Glajanski. Editing and sound design by Amy Durant. Mixing and mastering by Julian Kwasniewski. Executive produced by Stacy Book, Dominique Ferrari, and Avi Glajanski. Featuring the voices of Vivek Bola as Kaushal Narula, William Updike as Danny Garcia, and David Song as Miguel Bustamante. Music courtesy of Jingle Punks. Archival recordings of Kaushal Narula and Danny Garcia provided by Sherry Loiter, Don Martinez, and Kim Hansen. Archival recordings of Craig McCarthy and the Palm Springs Police and Danny Garcia's recordings of Judge Downing and the court clerk via DesertSun.com. The book, Until Someone Gets Hurt, by Sherry Loiter and Tyson Wrensch, with research assistance by Don Martinez and Kim Hansen, was an invaluable resource for us as we made American Hustlers. You can find a link to it in our show notes. Special thanks to Kathy Lombard, Matt Smith, Andy Wells, Tyson Wrench, Sherry Loiter, Don Martinez, Kim Hansen, Bob Moeller, and Christine Anotu at Warner Brothers. If you like this episode and want to hear more stories like this, please leave us a review and tell everyone. It really helps other people discover the show. For more information on this and all of our series, check out frequencymachine.com.